Hi, my name is Patrick Ahearn and I'm an architect. I'd like to share with you some of the influences that have been important to me in my life and career. There are a few architects that have really influenced my career and my way of thinking in terms of architecture. One is the firm of Greene and Greene in California, the turn of the century. Their use of wood and materials and the character and scale of their homes really was significant in terms of establishing a California lifestyle. I thought that was particularly important. Another firm that really had a strong influence in my career and my way of thinking was the firm of McKim, Mead and White, and some of their significant architecture, particularly in the public realm, really established the sense of scale and detail that had a significant influence in my approach to architecture as well. One of the most important architects that have had a strong influence in my career was an architect by the name of Royal Barry Wills. He practiced in the residential world pretty much from the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. And I have the wonderful, fortunate opportunity to live in a 1936 Royal Barry Wills house. And I've really learned firsthand how scale and proportion and use of rich materials that are indigenous to the area really established, not only on an individual home, but on a whole community, another way of living that celebrates the history of New England vernacular architecture, but in a way that is timeless in its appeal. Howard Ilkus was an architect that had a significant impact on me as a mentor. He was practicing with the Architects Collaborative when I was a young architect. And his approach to placemaking and sense of scale and place, and really how architecture can improve people's lives, really had an overwhelming influence in how I thought about architecture. And to this day, many of the approaches I take are really based on the lessons I learned from working with Howard at the Architects Collaborative. Interestingly, as I'm known as a classical architect, I was actually trained as a modernist. I went to architecture school in 1968, and I was really trained in the modern idiom. And it wasn't until I moved to New England after graduate school in 1973 that I really started to get a sense of how classical architecture can really influence people, and how classical architecture really embraces the human spirit and scale in a wonderful way. And so, having moved to Boston and living in New England, being surrounded by places like Beacon Hill and Back Bay really brought out an approach that I hadn't really thought about. And the level of detail and scalability of these wonderful places and community spaces really has had a major impact in my career as a classical architect. Having been practicing architecture for 48 years, and I look back at my career, there are two major accomplishments that I feel most proud of. One is my work in the Back Bay in Boston, where I've been able to restore and renovate and even do in new construction over 400 projects in really revitalizing a whole neighborhood, from the residential components of the Back Bay, as well as Newbury Street, and what we know today as one of the most active and vibrant commercial and residential places in all of America. The second thing I feel most positive about is my work on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and particularly in Edgartown, a 350-year-old seaport-oriented community, of which in 12 blocks I've done over 200 projects in really revitalizing that whole town and reinforcing its history, but in a way that people can live and enjoy it today. So those spaces and places that I've worked in really have established, in my way of thinking, my legacy, and hopefully people will enjoy what I've been able to create for many years to come. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts and the influences that I've had in my career, and look forward to continuing the discussion.